For 60 years, the entire world of computing has obeyed a single rule. It is called Moore's Law, and it is the reason the phone in your pocket is more powerful than the computer that put astronauts on the moon. The rule is simple. Every couple of years, engineers learn to cram roughly twice as many tiny switches, called transistors, onto a chip by making each one smaller. Smaller, then smaller, then smaller again, for 6 decades. That relentless shrinking is the engine that built the modern world. But there are 2 enormous problems with that engine right now. The first is that it is finally running out of road, because you cannot shrink a transistor much past the size of a few atoms. And the second is that America has banned China from the one machine on Earth that does the shrinking. So China did something that sounds almost arrogant, until you realize it might actually work. Instead of struggling to win the shrinking race, China declared the race itself obsolete, and set out to write a brand new rule to replace Moore's Law entirely. Tonight I am going to show you how China is trying to kill the most famous law in all of technology, why its replacement might genuinely stick, and the honest catch you need to hear. Let me start with why this is such a bold move, because you have to understand how sacred Moore's Law is to appreciate what China just did. For 60 years, every chipmaker on the planet has organized its entire existence around this one idea. Whole industries, hundreds of billions of dollars, the careers of millions of engineers, all built on the promise that next year's chip will have smaller, more densely packed transistors than this year's. It is not really a law of physics. It is more like a promise the industry made to itself and kept, decade after decade, through sheer effort and staggering amounts of money. And for the West, that promise was a home field advantage, because the West, through that one Dutch company and its impossible machine, controlled the cutting edge of the shrinking. As long as the game was about who could make transistors smallest, the West held the winning cards, and it made very sure China could not get the machine to play. And it is worth remembering where this rule even came from, because it explains why letting go of it feels almost like heresy. Back in 1965, a scientist named Gordon Moore, who would go on to help found Intel, simply noticed that the number of transistors on a chip was doubling at a steady pace, and predicted it would keep going. That casual observation hardened into a promise, and then into the metronome of the entire industry. But every exponential eventually meets reality. Today's transistors are so small they are measured in mere handfuls of atoms, and at that scale the laws of physics turn hostile. Electrons begin to leak straight through barriers that are supposed to stop them, a ghostly effect called quantum tunneling, and the chips run hotter and waste more power the smaller you go. On top of that, the cost of building a factory for each new, smaller generation has exploded into the tens of billions of dollars, so only a tiny handful of companies on Earth can even afford to keep playing. Moore's Law is not being murdered by China. It is dying of old age, and China simply decided to be the one holding the pen when the will gets written. Now here is China's answer, and it is beautifully simple once you see it. If you cannot go smaller, go up. Think of a chip, like a single crowded floor of a building. Moore's Law was the endless struggle to fit more and more rooms onto that one floor by making each room tinier. China's approach, led by Huawei, is to stop obsessing over the size of the rooms and instead start building upward, stacking floor on top of floor, connecting them with very short, very fast elevators. In the language of chips, this is called three-dimensional stacking, and Huawei has given its version a name, logic folding, because it physically folds and stacks the logic of the chip into layers instead of spreading it flat. By stacking the pieces close together and shortening the wiring between them, you can pack in more computing power and move data faster, all without ever needing to shrink a single transistor, and therefore without ever needing the forbidden machine. If you want to understand the deep shifts that decide which country owns the future of technology, then subscribe to Sinova, because these are the moves that matter far more than the daily headlines, and showing them to you clearly is the entire point of this channel. Now let me tell you the part that is almost breathtaking in its ambition. Huawei did not just build a workaround, it proposed a whole new rule to replace Moore's Law, and it even gave it a name, the Tau Scaling Law. Here is the idea behind it. For 60 years, Progress was measured by one thing: how small your transistors were. Huawei is arguing that this is the wrong thing to measure now. Its new law says the real prize is not how small the parts are, but how fast the whole system moves data around, how quickly signals travel through the machine. It is a complete reframing of what winning even means. Moore's law asked, how small can you go? The Chinese answer asks, how fast can the whole thing think, no matter what size the parts are? And crucially, that new question can be won with stacking, with clever wiring, with better architecture, none of which require the machine China was banned from. Huawei even claims that with this approach it can keep improving its chips for years to come, reaching a density that rivals the world's most advanced nodes by the early 2030s, all without a single one of the machines America worked so hard to deny it. And this stacking trick is not just theory. It is already how the most advanced memory chips in the world are built, layer upon layer, connected by thousands of tiny vertical wires drilled straight through the silicon. Huawei's bet is to push that same idea into the logic, the thinking part of the chip, far more aggressively than anyone has yet dared. There is a real challenge here, and it is heat. Stack powerful chips on top of each other, and you build a tower that is very hard to cool, because the heat from the lower layers has nowhere to escape. Solving that cooling problem is one of the great engineering battles of the coming decade, and whoever cracks it first unlocks enormous power. China is pouring resources into exactly that fight, treating the ban not as a dead end but as the shove it needed to master a harder and ultimately more powerful way to build a chip. And there is a deep reason Huawei's new law focuses on speed instead of size, one that much of the industry quietly agrees with. In a modern computer, the transistors themselves are often no longer the bottleneck. The real bottleneck is moving data, shuttling information back and forth between the memory and the processor fast enough to keep the processor busy. Engineers even have a name for this: the memory wall. So a chip that is arranged to move data faster, over shorter distances, can outperform one with smaller transistors that are sitting there starved of information. By declaring that the speed of movement is the real prize, China is not simply making excuses for being banned from shrinking. It is pointing straight at what many experts believe is genuinely the next true frontier of computing. And stacking is only the first front, because behind it, in the quiet of Chinese university labs, something even more radical is brewing, and it aims at the very heart of the problem. Remember, the reason Moore's law is dying is that the transistor itself, made of silicon, is running into the hard limits of physics. So a team at one of China's top universities asked the most dangerous question of all: what if we stop using silicon? They built a transistor out of an entirely different material, based on the metal bismuth, thinner than you can imagine, and they published the result in one of the world's most respected scientific journals. Their claim was stunning. This silicon-free transistor could run around 40% faster than the very best 3-nanometer silicon transistors made by the industry leaders in America and Taiwan, while using around 10% less energy. If that holds up, it is not a workaround for the ban. It is a doorway out of the silicon era entirely, onto a new material where the old rules and the old machines simply do not apply. And it is worth understanding why a flat, atom-thin material like this could matter so much. A traditional transistor is a little three-dimensional block of silicon, and as you shrink it, controlling the flow of electricity through it gets harder and leakier. A two-dimensional material is different. It is essentially a sheet just one or a few atoms thick, so the electricity has almost nowhere to hide, and it can be switched cleanly and quickly, even at sizes where silicon falls apart. Scientists around the world have chased these two-dimensional materials for years as the possible successor to silicon. What the Chinese team claimed to do was not just make one, but make one that is genuinely faster and more efficient than the very best silicon on Earth. If that promise survives the brutal journey from the laboratory to the factory, it does not merely bend the rules of the chip world, it rewrites them from the atom up. Here is the rehook, the thing to hold on to. Look at what China is actually doing across all of this, because it is the same brilliant strategy in 3 different forms. The West built its dominance on one specific game, making silicon transistors ever smaller, and then it locked the doors so China could not play. China's response was not to pick the lock. It was to walk away from that room entirely and start building new rooms the West never thought to guard. Stack the chips upward instead of shrinking them. Change the rule about what winning even means. And underneath it all, try to replace silicon with a completely new material. You cannot ban a country out of a game if that country decides to invent a different game. That is what killing Moore's Law really means here. It is not that China made a smaller transistor. It is that China is trying to make the entire question of transistor size stop mattering. Now, I promised you honesty, and here it is, because this is where the hype and the reality part ways, and you deserve the real picture. Moore's Law was not slowing down only for China. It was slowing down for everyone. The physical limits of shrinking silicon are a wall the whole industry has been hitting for years, which is exactly why the West is also racing into three-dimensional stacking and advanced packaging. The biggest American and Taiwanese chip makers stack and package chips too, and in many ways they still do it better than anyone. In fact, the most powerful artificial intelligence chips on the market right now, the ones the whole world is fighting over, already depend on exactly this kind of stacking, towers of memory bonded to a processor, and that technology is led as much from Taiwan and California as from anywhere in China. So this is not a case of a sleeping West being quietly lapped. It is a case of the entire industry turning the very same corner at once, with China simply determined not to be left behind on the new road the way it was blocked on the old one. So China did not single-handedly discover the future. It is running hard down a road the whole industry is now traveling. And a lot of Huawei's boldest claims, the new law, the exact numbers, the targets for the early 2030s, are exactly that. Claims and roadmaps, not finished products, you can buy today. Naming a new law does not make it real. And that silicon-free bismuth transistor, as exciting as it is, exists right now as a single laboratory device, not a chip in a factory. Turning one brilliant transistor in a lab into billions of them in a working processor is a journey that has broken many great ideas before. But even with all of those caveats, and they are real, the strategic picture is what should stick with you, because it is the whole story of this era in miniature. When the West found China's weak point and squeezed, banning it from the machine that shrinks transistors, it was betting that there was only one road to more powerful chips, and that it controlled the gate. China's answer was to question the assumption underneath the entire ban. It asked, what if smaller is not the only way forward? What if we go up instead of down? What if we change what we measure? What if we leave silicon behind altogether? A ban is only as strong as the assumption that there is one path. China is attacking that assumption from three directions at once, and it only has to be right about one of them to make the whole ban far less powerful than it looked on the day it was announced. So the next time someone tells you that China has been frozen out of the future of chips, remember that China's answer was not to beg for the machine it was denied. It was to look at the 60-year-old rule the entire industry worships, the rule the West built its advantage on, and calmly announce that it intends to replace it. Maybe it succeeds, and maybe it does not. But a country that responds to being locked out of a game by trying to end the game and start a new one is not a country you can contain with a single ban. If you want to keep watching which of these audacious bets actually pays off, then subscribe to Sonova, and the next time you hear that Moore's Law is dead, remember that the fight now is not over who obeys the old rule, but over who gets to write the new one.